Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch, and I am the host of this podcast. And yes, we are your number one podcast to bring you stories around death, dying, and grief, and all the messiness that comes in between with some amazing people out here doing some amazing things, changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. Now, I have a really great guest for you guys. Now, before I bring her up here, I would like to say that if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head on over to the YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. But most importantly, maybe you know someone who can benefit from the conversations that we have. Please share this along with them. Now, this is a live stream, so if you have any questions or comments for either myself or the guest, please put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them as we go. Now, one other thing before I bring on my guest, I would like to say that this is for educational purposes only. Now, guys, help me welcome my guest, Stacey Johnson, to the show. Stacey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm doing well. Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tony. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. We've been following each other on social media for quite some time, right? And
Right.
it's been amazing just watching everybody grow and getting a chance to know a lot more about your work. Now, before we get into that, introduce yourself to the audience. Tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Okay. Yes, I'm Stacey Johnson. I am from Ohio, and I've been a clinical therapist for 25 years in the state of Ohio. And about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to do more. I and wanted to reach more women. And so I kind of expanded my therapy and I went into coaching. And so I'm a woman empowerment coach and a resilience mentor. And I've experienced my own grief. And so I wanted to be able to help women that have experienced some form of grief or life altering events, and walk them through, emotional regulation, nervous system regulation, and thrive, just become, a better version of themselves personally and professionally.
I like that. I like that. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. What was your deciding factor to wanting to go in to be a women's empowerment coach?
Yeah, I've been working for 20 years in a school. And after my husband passed away, I, started following another grief coach. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to, one, I wanted to help more women than I could in therapy. With therapy, I have to stay within the state limits. And I, about a year, 6 months after he passed away, I started doing some extra work. I was working in the school and then doing some telehealth. And I was getting burnt out with all the amount of hours that I was working and thought I wanted to reach more women, but then also kind of bring back some of my own time so that I could be available to my own family. I wanted to be able to, take our kids to things that they needed to be, go to, like doctor's appointments or events that they had. And I wanted to be able to do that without someone saying, no, you can't take any more time off of work.
Right.
So I wanted to become my own boss and decided to do that. But the biggest reason was to help more women. I was originally helping women with, overthinking and that nervous system regulation. And then it came to me that I I have more to offer in regards to the grief topic. So I've expanded in our helping women that have experienced some life altering event that has, created this increased amount of overwhelm.
Mhm.
And that's kind of why I've started.
Okay. Now that leads me to my first question. What was the grieving process like for you? Because I talk with men all across the world, and of course we may deal with grief just a little bit different and everything. And our grieving process, and this is part of the reason why I love doing what I do, is because educating people on what that looks like and understanding the similarities between the two, right? but
Mhm.
also, how to notice certain things like men. One of our go-tos when we're going through something painful is anger, right? And a lot of people that could be misconstrued and and taken out of context. And I go, no, this is the way that men cry. We've been conditioned at such an early age to never show weakness or anything like that. So in order to maintain our masculinity, we resort to anger. This way, no one will say that you're weak or judge you or anything
Mhm.
like that. They may say that you're crazy or something like that, which we can deal with that, right? We can deal with that. So, I want to know a little bit more about the process of grief that you had experienced.
Sure, sure. Well, to be honest, I suffered two traumatic griefs back to back.
Mhm.
My
Okay.
stepfather passed away on October 29th, and it was he didn't wake up, so it was very sudden. And then 3.5 weeks later, my husband passed away, uh, only after being ill with COVID for a week or 2 weeks. And so within 3.5 weeks, I lost two significant men in my life.
Right.
And I had two kids. So to be honest, my grief process in the beginning was just do. You just need to keep doing, get all of the necessary things done. My husband had a company, so I had to kind of finalize those things, close down his company. I had to start selling some things, because why do I need all of his tools, and I didn't need his truck anymore, and so I just did. And that really wasn't the best process. And so and then I started to realize, and I started to read, and I had another friend that had experienced a loss, so her and I would talk often. And then I had listened to a few podcasts, and I started to realize that because of my therapy education, between college and between attending workshops to keep my license, I realized that I had the right tools inside me. I just had to dig a little deeper and realize, like, what did I really need? And my it was my thought process that was getting in my way, cuz all of the what if questions, what if something happens to me? What And all the shoulds,
Mhm.
should I have called the doctor sooner? Should I have done this? Should I have done that? And a lot of what I realized were questions that, one, I would never get an answer to, a lot of things that were out of my control. So I started digging deeper, and then I started putting self care plans in place. I started changing my thought process. I started, doing some meditations and doing some mindfulness activities during my day. Uh, and then it started to come together that, and I started to realize that I was managing a lot better than I was when I just put everything aside and just did. And so that's what my grief process looked like. Uh, was avoidance at first. Just let me just do. If I
Right.
did, kept myself busy, then I didn't think about all the thoughts that sometimes would sneak up on me, and so that's kind of what I did. I think a lot of my education from, my degree really helped me, you know, s- go deeper and
Mhm.
realize what I needed to do.
Now that leads. I have a question because you have kids as well, right?
I
And
do.
how did the kids process this, and how did you help them um, walk through their grief as well? Because and the reason why I ask this is because a lot of times what ends up happening, I've talked to a lot of people, you know, they parents never know how to sit with their children because they're too busy trying to be strong for them, and never really opened up the doors to have that conversation. And it seems as if on both sides, someone is waiting for someone else to say something, right? And so they never really connect in that manner to see what is going on, to how to hold that space with them. But also help them navigate those different variations that may come about.
Hmm.
How did you help your children?
One, I think it was modeling, because I did have my daughter come to me about 6 months after my husband had passed and said, "Mom, thank you." I'm like, "Thanks for what?" And she said, "Just being you, like modeling how to manage stress in a healthier way, because
Mhm.
she's seen other people that might use unhealthy coping strategies, either between scrolling endlessly or, drugs or alcohol or avoidance, like isolating themselves. So she said, "Thanks, mom." And, I guess the what I helped the most was I just was there, like we we tried to stick with the same routines, we had dinner every night the same way we would have if their dad was still here. I cooked, we have the exact same positions that we sat in. Everybody always sat in the same seat and we always keep the same routine. So keeping the same routines, I think, was one of them, and just knowing that they knew that they could come to me if they wanted to talk to me. You know, just offering them hugs when I knew that they might need it, and offering them, knowing that they knew that they could start counseling if they wanted to start counseling. If they didn't want to start counseling, our youngest daughter raced four-wheelers, and her dad was always the one that took her. I knew how to book the hotels, I knew how to pay for the things, but I never took her. And so she started racing shortly after he passed. Well, we went to a race the day after his funeral. But that's what she knew what to do. Like, she knew that she could connect to her dad by being at the racetrack. So I allowed her to continue doing what she wanted to do. And a lot of times we would just talk about memories, on our way, on our drive, and that's our um kind of like our, I don't want to say policy, but our household rule is that their dad, we talk about him as if he was still alive. Like, we talk about the memories. I told them, I know that they're not in a position, they're still finishing college, they're graduating this year. So we, honor him on his birthday. Like, we went to his favorite restaurant, just the three of us, and um just ate and talked about him. But then I told them it will be my goal when they ever have grandchildren is that my grandchildren will know their grandpa as if he was still alive. And so I think that was what I did, as I never told them they couldn't talk.
If you need a minute, you can, because I can see the emotions and things like that, and I appreciate your vulnerability. And I do understand that these conversations can take us to a place where those emotions can come about. And I would like to tell you that this is a place where if they come out, let them come. Okay. This is our space.
Right,
This is our
right,
space, and this is space for us to be able to express these things. So if you
right.
need a minute, you by all means take a breath.
I'll just
Yeah.
take a sip here.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right. Which now leads me to my next question, right? Do you think it's harder for people to speak of our loved ones as if they're still alive? Because, and the reason why I say this, when my father passed away, followed by my younger brother. I didn't really speak about them. Um, I was more of short answers. Hey, no, I'm all right, you know. And even now, I have a hard time speaking of them if they're still around. But I think that goes with a lot of my loved ones that have passed as well, friends, things like that. I still remember them, but I have a tendency of remember them in the past tense. Oh man, I remember when I was with such and such, leading up to, and it take me on a journey of, you know, um, times and places and moments with them, and I can go back through a timeline, so to speak. You know, do you think it's harder for people to speak of people in the present day contents when they lose them?
I I think so. I think it's a lot easier for us to think about the past. It's easier,
Mhm.
we're especially the happy memories. Those are the things that, we're able to. And it's hard, I think, to think about, like, the present moment. But I had that incident today. My daughter had a procedure done this morning, and while we were in the recovery area, she just says, "I want my dad." And so I will ask my girls, I will tell them, like, close your eyes and think about what he would say to you right now if he
Mhm.
was here, so that, and sometimes that helps them get through that moment when they're really wanting their dad.
Mhm.
Um, but, when I think it is hard for people to talk present terms because they're not sure. The uncertainty uncertainty brings up a different layer of feelings, which is one thing that I work on, is because uncertainty can bring up that fear or that anxiety. And so that is a lot of times, and then we end up maybe overthinking that uncertainty. And
Mhm.
so when we talk about present times, we're really not sure what they would say, because they're not here. But when I ask them to bring, or to think about, like, what would your dad say to you today, it is, what their memory brings up. Like, not
Yeah.
100% sure how he would answer today, but they know what he would have said about this situation,
Right.
4 years ago.
Right. I want to ask you. I want to ask you a question because as you were speaking about that, I started smiling because I was thinking about something. Do you ever find yourself laughing, just out of the blue when you get lost into a memory that takes you to a place where conversation and you shared that laugh with your loved one? Do you ever find yourself going to that place and just going and have people look at you?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever done it without someone that has known my husband,
Mhm.
but I have caught myself doing that for sure in the presence of my girls.
Yeah. I find myself doing it a lot. Like, so there's times where I'll be sitting down by myself and I'll have a memory pop up, and I'll just sit there and just laugh and go, "Oh my god," because I think at some point you remember the small little details, facial expressions, right? And the words that you hear are a little bit more crisp, and things like that. And you kind of hold on to it, and and I um and I think that's part of the process of grief, right? Grief will make us pay attention to those details, and cherish them a little bit more, things like that.
Mhm,
And I think it's a common thing. This is something that I've been exploring for quite some time. Maybe I'm starting to think it is a common thing with people, but I'm also, which leads me to my next question. How do you help women go from the place of being stuck to the place of doing, right? Because I find that interesting because most times when we're going through the thralls of grief, the doing part becomes the hardest part for us as we're in the beginning stages and sometimes throughout time as well, right? So,
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you help women do to navigate that?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things that I do, the first parts of what I teach women is one, the emotional language. So
Mhm.
giving words to our feelings, because grief is one part of it, but there's many layers because like you said,
Right.
men have, they respond with anger, which is a feeling. And women also have anger, but they don't necessarily react the same way.
Mhm.
And so in getting in touch with our true feelings is one step. And then giving them the skills to, you know, uh, regulate their nervous system.
Mhm.
And then I go into the thought process because our thoughts are also this huge trigger to these feelings that we have.
Mhm. Right.
I can remember so many times that I would, maybe find myself, actually in that anger kind of like when I was driving home from a situation and
Mhm.
getting really angry, and then I would sit for a second and then realize that that was a signal to my brain of what some of the thoughts that I was having right then. And so then I could deal with those thoughts. So giving language to our emotions is a huge
Mhm.
step because again, like you said, like when earlier in the conversation, when, people would ask you how you're doing, our typical response is okay, I'm fine. And so during grief, how many times, I don't know how many times I was asked, like, how are you doing? Do you really want
Yeah.
the answer? Do you want the answer that I'm
Yeah.
really feeling? Or, um, but so giving them language, and I use this emotional wheel that has tons of la- emotional language,
Mhm.
and then recognizing how our bodies, where our sensations are, and then the thought process, and then a self-care plan because that it's about also taking care of us and loving us and being able to do things for us, you
Mhm.
know, as we're kind of going through this process.
So I love the fact, you brought up a couple great techniques, right? One is understanding the language that comes along with it, learning how to articulate. Um, and that was something that I struggled with in the beginning, but I knew I was curious enough to want to know more about it, right? Because I knew as a human being and as a man, this is going to be one of the areas that I'm going to struggle with the most, right? Because we've always been told to man up. We've been told, like
Mhm.
your feelings doesn't matter. We learn not to trust people, and things like that. And the reason why I say that because society, life in general,
Mhm.
teaches us that people are not safe with our emotions, and
Right.
so in turn, we would rather tell you that everything is okay. Oh, one of the things that I did and this is going to sound crazy, but when my son passed away, one of the things that I did 2 weeks after he passed away, I went back to church. You know, I wanted to show people I was strong. I did. I
Mhm.
wanted to show I'm strong. This ain't gonna whip me. So I went back to church, but inside I was falling apart. And so
Mhm.
in the beginning, people just were like, "Hey, you okay?" And this, and that. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay. And I got so sick and tired of people asking me that question, especially since they knew what just happened.
Mhm.
You should know that I'm not okay, right? So don't ask
Right.
me that question.
Right.
So I started going back to the gym and I started lifting weights. I started getting bigger and stronger. And that way, when people would see me, they're like, oh, it looks like you're doing pretty good. And I realized I was on to something. I was like, if I stayed like this, no one asked me if I was doing okay. They just thought or assumed that I
Mhm.
was okay, right? And I kept that facade up for quite some time. I really did. I was like, oh, if I did this, then I don't have to worry about people talking to me.
Right.
And
Right.
and so that was one of the things I did, but also, not understanding the language that came along with it. And the reason now there's a term that I use with men. And I tell people when it comes to men and going through something traumatic or going through a deep loss, grief becomes a foreign love language that no one speaks. There's a lot of assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
right? And most men would allow you to assume you know what's going on or allow you the illusion that you know what's best for us, right?
Right.
Because we have a tendency of wanting to make others feel empowered while in turn we're falling apart, which leads me to not only that thought, but also this question, because you talk about the nervous system and regulating it, right? And I don't think a lot of people understand the significance between regulating your nervous system and getting it to fire the way that it needs to be in order for, and there's a term when we grieve from the neck up. The body keeps score from the neck down, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's a disconnect of information that comes in that your body is trying to relay to the brain of saying you need to do this, you need to do this, because we instinctively know what we need to do, but we don't trust ourselves enough to do them. If that,
Mm-hmm.
if I can use that term. So let's talk about the nervous system. How does one begin to regulate and start that reconnection through the brain and body to offer that healing, but also listen and trust ourselves again?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. And the nervous system, again, that's why I do the cognitive work that I do, as well as, nervous system regulation. Because, people will be like, well, I, am going to the gym again and doing, working out. Well, that's one piece of
Mhm.
our nervous system, but it's not, again, our brain is going, okay, fine, you're giving me an outlet, but I still don't feel safe. Like, there is
Mhm.
still that part of the nervous system that is in that fight or flight, because the thought process that can still be going on. I could be at the gym working out, but my thought is thinking, what if I would have called the doctor soon? What what if something happens to
Mhm.
me? Who's going to take care of my kids then? So our brain is still thinking we're in danger, because that thought process, even though I'm at the gym and I'm working out, part of my body might feel relaxed, but the other part of it, because it's getting the thoughts from the brain, is not
Mhm.
relaxed. And so it is, again, we have to do some retraining of our brain to know to so it knows that we're safe. But then
Mhm.
also there's that physical pieces, so I teach, somatic techniques in regards to just deep breathing and kind of
Mhm.
giving our brain the indication that we're safe in that moment. But then also, the self-care pieces, because we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. We need to make sure that we're getting rest when our body needs rest, and sleep, trying to sleep a good night's sleep. There's the eating healthy, because so many times people are emotional eaters, and they either may avoid eating, or they overeat, and they overeat the unhealthy things, because, again, they become that emotional eater. So they're eating like those fast, easy carbs that taste good, but they're not really doing much for our health of our body. Staying
Yeah.
hydrated, is another big piece of all of it. So it's taking care of our health part of our body. And then there's the cognitive pieces that I teach in regards to changing our thought process and really retraining our brain to know that we are safe.
Mhm.
And then there's, obviously the physical pieces of, the regulation, and, also providing them techniques with, like, staying grounded and getting, more in that present moment, instead of again allowing our thoughts to take us down this path of, all these shoulds and coulds and what ifs,
Right.
so
A lot of times I think the those questions will always be here. I know for me, I still ask questions. Like what if I would have did this, and what if I now I know in reality there was nothing I could do. Right, I
Mhm.
did everything I was supposed to do. Now
Right.
it doesn't stop the questions from coming. It doesn't stop me from being hard on myself for the what for those questions and things like that. And I want people to understand that this is a natural thing for you to ask those questions. Now the thing is
Right.
don't beat yourself up over them, right? Because when we beat ourselves up over those questions, we tend to take ourselves down a dark path, right?
Mhm.
That most of us never come back from. And we both know, a lot of the outcome that comes along with that, when it comes down to struggling with your mental health, when struggling with addiction, or even sometimes worse, right? And people will say, I must be going crazy. And things like that because your thought pattern does change, right?
Mhm.
Especially if you carry a lot of guilt and shame within your body, which I want to ask because you mentioned something, and I know since I've been doing this work 7 years ago, I'm noticing the different forms of techniques or the different forms of grief, and and what I mean by that, the different forms of grief coaches that have come about, facilitators and practitioners.
Mhm.
So we have a large range of individuals, and I want to touch on the somatic part of it. I have a friend, Jason, and he's a somatic grief coach, and I've had him on my show before. Awesome man, awesome guy. And now I've heard it from his perspective. Explain to the audience what somatic coaching is or therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just different techniques that help us, find ways to relax that, helps our nervous system relax, or
Mhm.
release, so like I help I've been trained in it. I'm not a somatic coach by no means. I've taken a few courses on somatic techniques and I will use them in my coaching practice and when I'm working in my private practice therapy. Uh, but it's that release. So it's finding ways to have that sudden release to help our bodies indicate that we're safe at that moment. So it's
Mhm.
like sometimes it can include a deep breathing. And then at that last exhale, we kind of shake our hands at the same time that we're exhaling. So
Mhm.
it's just a way to tell your brain, like, I'm done. I'm safe. I've released it, so
Right, right. And I want to talk about that a little bit, right? Because a lot of people don't pay attention to those things, and I love the fact that I've done I've done tapping, I've done breath work, um, I've done the shadow work as well, and a few other things that I do. But my go-to is always going to the gym. It's like therapy for me, right? When I'm in a gym, like when I'm around people, I take on a lot of energy and it's draining for me. And so when I go to the gym, it's my time to be in the moment, to allow myself and my thoughts and my emotions to go through the universe and make more sense of it. But also when it comes back, I realize that here's one thing, once the emotions come back to me, it has been broken down into probably another 7, 8, sometimes 10 different forms of that one emotion, right?
Mhm.
And that can be pretty confusing as well. But it also lets us know that these emotions, it's not black and white, right? You can have anger, but along with that anger, if broken down, there can be 7 different other forms of that anger. You have to pay
Mhm.
attention but also learn how to put the correct one where it needs to be. And I think that's important because once you begin to correct with that black and white, it allows you to be a little bit more honest with yourself and more honest with other people as you begin to take that journey through there of exploration.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously that's one of the reasons why I teach the language of emotions, because you're right. There's so many layers to one emotion. And what what I say is that our emotion is obviously, it's like energy. It is energy. And so, yeah, we can pick it up from others. It can come back to us in a different, like, we originally may have thought it was anger, but then it's now shame or guilt. And so, what I always, tell people when I'm working with them is that once we start to learn our language of emotions and learn the sensations that we're feeling it, and we get more comfortable, because again, going back to what you shared earlier in regards to our society, and I think even not even just men, but society in general, is that, you know, we just don't deal with emotions. People just don't talk about them.
Right.
And I mean, I always think about, that old movie, League of Their Own. There's no crying in baseball, like,
There's
I
no
always
crying in
think about that.
baseball.
I always think about like that that is just one phrase, and if we all have those kind of phrases that kind of get ingrained in our head, we think that emotions are not okay to share with others. And so then all these layers of emotions we have, and I try to teach people, is that our emotions are our energy. And so when we feel them, if we can identify the name of them, get more comfortable with them, and not afraid of our feelings,
Mhm.
then start to recognize the sensations in our bodies, then we can take that minute or that little bit of time of feeling them and start to realize, like, okay, why am I feeling that right now? Is it a thought that I had? Is it someone else's thought that what came into me?
Mm.
Like this ingrained,
Yeah.
or is it something that has, or is it my inner critic talking? Like what's going on that is producing that feeling right now? So we can start to dive more into, like, what do I need to do to manage it, or release it. So starting to know that process, I think, is pretty important too, because yeah, we can bring on other people's emotions pretty easily too. Like you said, when
Yeah.
you've gone to the gym and like you pick up on other people's feelings.
Right. And it is crazy, right? Because I never so a long time ago, I used to tell people because when you've gone through so many funerals, things like that, right? You see the people around you breaking down, crying, and things like that. I used to tell myself, because there was a rule that we lived by, especially doing the things that I've done. Emotions will get you killed. So I never really validated my emotions. I always said that they were useless. These emotions are useless, right? Because if I get wrapped up into this, there's a possibility that someone could do something to me in a time of vulnerability. So I've always been in survival mode. Now, there are times where even now, today, where I have to understand whether if the emotions is valid or if this is just a reaction
Mm-hmm.
to something or to someone. And
Right.
this is how I begin to regulate those emotions, because if those emotions are not valid, I can just go, not right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is not mine. So whomever this belongs to, please give this back to them, right? And I'm fine. I'm usually fine, right? So it is. And most people will call it emotional detachment, and that can be a very tricky word as well. I just go, no, I'm just aware of
Hmm.
what's going on. And if it's something that is not important to me, then it's not
Right.
important to me,
Right.
right? You
Right.
know, that also comes with a deeper understanding of the subconscious and the unconscious mind as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would definitely agree with you on that, is that, but again, it goes back to that awareness piece. If we're not aware of our emotions and we take that on, then it becomes, then that is starts to be maybe what our reactions, become, and then,
Yes.
like, and I always, like I'll use my own family as an example. Like my kids could be having a bad day and I'm empathetic, like I'm here, I will talk to you, but that doesn't mean my day, that doesn't mean I have to be sad. I can still be happy or I can still be enjoying my moments, but still be available for them.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
understand that they may be sad or angry or, whatever emotion that they're having, but that doesn't mean that I have to own it as well. I can be empathetic and be supportive, but I can still be enjoying my moments.
I like that
It
because I
doesn't,
do feel the same way.
you know,
I feel
it doesn't
well.
make me detached
Yeah.
from them or emotionally detached from them. It just makes me aware that they're having their moments, maybe triggered by a song that they heard or something that happened
Hmm. Hmm.
in their own day, but my day is different than theirs,
Right.
you know. So,
You, this that's crazy because I've been called cold because someone would do something to me. I will take a split second to think about it and go, yeah, no, this is not worth it, right? And people will go, what's wrong? I go, it's not worth it. Well, they're like, what am I going to waste that emotion on, right? Like this, for one, did you not see the situation? Did you not see this? This is not on me, right? So why should I have to have an emotional reaction to someone else's choices? You chose that, not me, you
right,
know. So people are like, dude, you're just cold. I go, why do I have to be cold because I chose not to take part in the responsibility of someone else's choice, right?
correct, correct, correct.
Do you ever have that problem?
I don't think I've had that necessarily, or at least no one has said that to me. But I have definitely, realized, and as because I am more in tune to my own emotions now and the
Right,
emotions of others. And yeah, I don't necessarily have to own their problem. Like I'm starting to become more aware that I don't necessarily, my reactions don't need to follow their kind of choices.
right,
And so I don't think I've never had anybody call me cold, but maybe, people are starting to like, back off or, not necessarily, maybe they don't feel as comfortable sharing with me. I don't know.
I mean, that's look. I think there's a way when people begin to understand, right? Just recently, I had a friend. I had four of my friends pass away, and I had to pretty much look at the situation, right? One of them was an overdose. Two of them were natural causes, and one was um, an unaliving, a self-inflicted wound. And I looked at all four of these, and I asked myself, did I do everything as a friend
Hmm.
to show support, to to be there when they needed me the most? Did I leave the door open to have those conversations, but also was it welcoming to them to be able to want to step through? Now, I've known these gentlemen for some years. And so they knew that they always had that option of coming to me. When these things happen, I was quick to go to a place of acknowledgement and to be able to sit down with other individuals to not allow the reaction of the emotion to take away from other people. Now, in situations like that, I am emotionally void, right?
Mhm.
And the reason being, because what I learned, and this is a question that was posed to me that I will pose to you as well. Someone said, "Do you think that if you go into an environment and you emotionally charged, do you think that can dictate the way that the conversation as well as the environment goes?" And I go, "Yes," because
Mhm.
for one, you said a couple of things, but I want to address the main one. It's the environment that can actually dictate how those emotions go. Now, if you're in an unsafe environment and you've just gone through something traumatic, if I come into the situation and I'm emotionally charged, I take away from your experience. And instead of holding that space, now we can go from a place from 0 to 100 real quick, from a place of going, oh, feeling sorry, feeling sad, to a place of anger, because now you've now allowed the environment to dictate the direction that this can go in. Right. So then you
Mhm.
begin to look for people to point the finger to, to try to do the whole blame game. Or you can go in a totally different direction to where you begin to play the victim role, right? So I'll pose that question to you as well. Do you think that your emotions can dictate conversations in that space of others grieving?
Yeah, I mean, again, our reactions are our way of our emotions being seen to others, right? No
Hmm.
one knows really what we're feeling unless we tell them. And so, but our reactions can sometimes have others assume what we're feeling. And
Mm.
so, because again, they don't know, but our reactions, like you said earlier, men grieve with anger. And so people's perceptions is that they're just an angry person versus really that they're grieving. And
Mm.
so our reactions can for sure, I think, dictate, one, how conversations go, and two, that the way that, the environment,
Hmm.
because yeah, like we said, I mean, if you're coming in at you have a different reaction and it's a situation, but if another reaction can turn it into a totally different situation.
Okay. I want
Yeah.
to add to that, right? I want to add to that because here's a question that I pose to people, especially when I sit down and do educational courses with women, on how to create an atmosphere inside of a very chaotic environment, but also the rules, the boundaries, and things like that, to be able to uphold, to allow men to be vulnerable enough to have those conversations, to express what we're going through, right?
Mhm.
So one thing that we have to, something so basic, right? I go, have you ever seen the men in your life cry?
Right.
And oftentimes they would go, no,
Mm.
this. I said, well, what have you seen? And then they go, well, he's always like this and he's always like that. And I will sit there because they're saying it, but they're not putting two and two together. And so I'll begin to smile a little bit. They go, well, what are you smiling for? I go, look, the reason why you never see a man cry is because you're not paying attention, because there's no tears. And they often look and go, what? I go, yeah, let's go back to the basics. When men are children and we get in trouble, we always get told, boy, you better stop crying. I'm gonna give you something to cry about. Or they go, young boys don't cry. You might want to man up and this, that, another. So what is our go-to? Think about, and it's so simple that it goes across people's heads. I go, so what is our go-to? It's anger. Because when we have to hold that in and things like that, we have to be tough because this is the way that we've been taught. And society confirms this over and over and over and over again that we become conditioned,
Mm-hmm.
to act in this manner. I said, now, what if I told you that your anger that you see is the way that the men are crying? Would that change the way that you approach and how you build that environment? Or build that atmosphere. And people often go, I never really thought about it that way. I say, so now let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen the men in your life cry? And if so, how many times have you? It's not that we don't have the emotions. We just express them in different ways. Again, that goes
Mm-hmm.
back, I said it's like when men grieve, it's like a foreign love language that no one speaks. So it is
Right.
important or imperative that we surround ourselves with other men that have gone through things that are similar. Now, there was something else that came about, and I found it fascinating. I love comic books, right? I love being able to read them, draw them. It takes me to a place of childhood. Some of my most enjoyable memories as a child. Now, there was an episode between the Fantastic Four and the Incredible Hulk and Thor, right? So all of these Marvel characters come together in this one book. And in the book, I don't know if you're familiar with the Fantastic Four, but
Mm-hmm.
Storm, the kid, the Johnny, the one who was full of fire, so him and Thing were best of friends. We know this, right? Brothers to the end. Well, in that episode, the kid passed away, right? He was unalive. And the Thing didn't know how to deal with it. Well, Thor and Hulk heard about this. Now, these are some of the two strongest guys in the comic book industry. And so they go to him. And without words or anything like that, the Thing begins to pound the Hulk. Him and Thor just throwing them, pounding them, boom, 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 and they just took it because they knew what was going on, right? And this goes on forever. This goes on forever. And then at the end, they're holding each other, and it really made sense when I began to tell that to people. They go, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." Think about it for a minute. This is how we express ourselves. We just need someone strong enough to be able to receive the blows that we give them without getting upset, but with a deep set sense of understanding, you know,
Mm-hmm.
of the expression that comes along with it. Now, how do women? Because I know women are more communicative, and when and they're more communal when it comes down to those spaces as well. But then there's women out there that are pretty much raised like young men as well that may have a difficult time with doing that because they've been in survival mode for so long. How
Mm-hmm.
do you approach those situations using the tools that you have to help them be more open um, to having those conversations and start the healing process?
Mm-hmm. Well, women have been caretakers from the beginning of time. And
Mhm,
so a lot of times when they are experiencing tough emotions like this, they start to, at least what I have seen is that our inner critic kind of comes into play. Is
mhm,
that, you know, I I am not good enough, or I am, you know, if I ask for help, that I'm not strong enough. And
mhm,
so one of the things that I do work on too is looking at those internal messages and start challenging them and asking ourselves, do we have any proof? If I will I be judged if I open up? If I
Yes.
start to open up and share what I'm feeling or what I need from someone else, because that was definitely one of my hardest things was to make, asking my tribe, asking the people for things. My husband owned a construction company, so we never hardly ever needed, if something broke in the house, he knew how to fix it or he could ask someone within his own trade circle.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I didn't have that trade circle and I sometimes needed to ask and I had to kind of recognize, put that internal message away and say, it's not that you're failing, it's something that you don't know. But if you're taught it, you might be able to do it the next time without asking for help. So, you know, and I had to, so teaching ourselves that, we have to sometimes challenge those internal critics and be able to ask for help when we need it or share and be open and know that we're not going to be judged.
Love that. I love that. Now, I want people to be able to find you. So, as we begin to wrap up this episode of the Brief Let's Talk About It podcast, first I want to say thank you for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and having such an amazing conversation with me. I look forward to having many, many more. So, before I let you go, I got a couple questions for you. One would be,
Sure.
how can people find you? Because if they enjoy this conversation, I'm pretty sure we didn't even scratch the surface on a lot of this, right? But I
Right.
want to save it because I don't want to give away all your secrets and your techniques, right? You know what I'm saying? But if
Right.
they
Thank
enjoy
you.
it, I want people to know where to find you. So how can people find you, Stacey?
Well, I'm on YouTube as well, and that is Stacey Johnson Coaching, and I'm on Facebook at Stacey Johnson, LinkedIn, Stacey Johnson Coaching, and and I have a website which is also staceyjohnsoncoaching.com, and all those places are where people can find me. And I actually just completed a new um, PDF guidebook that is a grief to grace, is what it's
Mm,
called.
okay.
And it is has some simple techniques, evaluates and looks at some of the myths that go along with grief,
Mm,
and then provides a couple journaling prompts and a meditation. And so that's available on my YouTube channel in one of the links there. So yeah, people can find me there.
all right. I love that. I love that. Everybody, her information is in the YouTube channel, in the description. So if you guys are interested, women out there, if you're interested and you're looking for support, go there and check her out, and contact her, and let her know that you saw her on the podcast, and get the help that you need and that you deserve and that you need, and because this shows you again that there's people out here like myself, and so many other amazing people that genuinely care about your healing and have tools that you can use, like right now. Now, my second question would be, Stacey, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
Interesting question. um, Goodness. Hmm. Probably to uh, have uh, be able to get places a lot faster.
Okay.
To be able to fly, just to be able to be somewhere faster. Because sometimes I just feel like I can't be where I need to be fast enough.
Okay. That makes sense. That definitely makes sense. So now leads me to this. If you could leave the audience with something, what would you leave them with?
There, that your emotions you do not need to be afraid of your emotions, that you do not need to be ashamed of them. They are yours. And when you get to learn more about sitting with your own emotions, then you can start, you know, moving on. Like I hate that phrase, like, like grief will, it will go away with time, or,
Mm,
you just need to move on. And I hate those phrases. And that's not what I'm trying to say, is that when we learn more emotions, that we're moving away from our grief, because your grief will go with you everywhere. I
mhm.
always say
Yeah.
that we grieve because we love someone. And so that if we don't stop loving them because they're no longer here with us, we will always love them. And so we will grieve forever, but it doesn't
Mhm.
have to kind of paralyze you or keep you stuck. You can still grieve and still enjoy your life.
I love that. I love that. Uh, Stacey, again, thank you for being on the show. I would love to do
Thank
this
you.
again and everything. And so, yeah, for everyone else out there, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for just supporting the channel. And we have more coming. Like I said, we got the rest of this week. I will be taking a small bit of a break for about a month or so. I will be back with a new look and more amazing conversations. Okay. And, guys, reach out to me. Maybe you know someone out there that can benefit from it. So please share this along with them. Again, Stacey, have an amazing day. For everyone else,
Thanks.
thank you for your support. I love you, and we're going to see you guys in the next one. All right, peace.
Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.